This is Laborz, and it is so nice to have you here. These are the paints you need. And this is the rooster that you can hear. Okay guys, let's tackle this one with a strategy. I'm preparing 7 of the walkers for painting. I picked 1 from each variation of the walkers, or at least I think so. If you are planning to do a batch of these, don't mix the variations, just pick one type of the same guys, because it will speed up your process way more, because you don't really need to figure out the details on each variation, and you can progress by painting one subject at a time, like the leather parts or the skin, and be much faster overall. Now the mold lines on these guys are actually not that bad, so take the time and remove them with the dual part of your blade, or I will slap on your tiny hand. Mostly you can find the mold lines on the sides of the arms and legs, so get scraping, like Granny scraping her plate with her nails because she is still hungry, but we keep her in a caloric deficit because she gained some weight and the summer body won't make itself, you know. If you have some, you can use some files for the hard to reach areas. Just always go back with the back of your blade to smooth out the surface as much as you can, or I will slap on your tiny hand. For priming, I choose a zenithal approach for these guys. I use the airbrush with a few drops of thinner to the cup before adding the primer, so you guys follow the same procedure because I do not want to hear that you clogged your airbrush again. But of course, I won't hear that because you still haven't bought an airbrush, are you? So use your spray cans, because buying 5 of those a year going to cost the same like buying a compressor with a cheap airbrush, but who wants to save money in this economy? Am I right? So first cover the minis with black or a very dark grey. Keep a knuckle space between the mini and the airbrush and apply the paint with small bursts. You know the drill guys, if the paint is webbing, reduce the air pressure, and if it comes out with a dusty finish, increase it. It's not really rocket science, but most of you watching this video already doing something like this. That's you. After the black, I used heavy titanium white from Pro Acryl, and shout out to Dom who recommended this white and one of my big time supporters on Patreon, because this is one of the best whites I ever used with a brush or an airbrush. And yes, you can use a rattle can for that, for God's sake. Add a few layers to create an effect like light is coming from above. Hold the airbrush in a 60 to 80 degree angle while you apply the paint, and keep the shadow areas that face towards the ground completely black. If you only have a white primer, you can cover the whole mini with white, because for the better of this tutorial, it's not going to matter a lot, but I like to have the black on the extreme shadows, because when we speed paint and miss a spot or two, with our layers, a black area will look like a shadow, but a white part will always going to look like we missed something. So it's up to you how you prime it, but I just like you to know that I'm right on this one. So the black will be our darkest shadow color, and depending how many white layers you give to the mini, we will have a quick value sketch that we can already use as a reference for the highlights and as an undercoat. I like to approach these speed paints with a contrast paint, so you guys can ease into these videos and think we will only use washes, and once we get to the more skill-based techniques, you're already too deep into the process to give up on it. Anyway, I give the skin areas 2 coats of Gilman flesh, but I do one simple trick before applying my second coat. 1, 2. So yeah, I'm kind of ashamed by this joke. That's right, I wait for my first layer to dry. To be fair, you don't really need to wait for it, because once you get the 7th of these guys, the first one probably dried by then. But if you're lightning fast or you paint in smaller batches, then make sure that your layers are dry like Granny's adult diaper, okay? You can be generous with the contrast paint and don't worry about being super clean. So if you happen to have some contrast paint on the ropes or the armor, don't care about it for now. We can fix all of that later once we use more opaque layers. Okay, so I was checking these walkers and some of them have these reddish brown drapes, but others have these teal ones. I will make the more reddish variation on the runners in an upcoming video, but for the walkers I'm going to use Sunz of Aorus Green. To use the benefits of our Zenithal primer, I'm going to use thin layers to cover the robes of the soldiers. I'm applying 2 coats again to increase the opacity mainly over the more shadowy areas, but if you don't have full coverage on the areas that face up towards the sky, don't worry about it because we like to use the value difference that the Zenithal priming created. Remember, we have to paint like 150 of these guys, so we are not taking our time and being super precise, we want to rush these out as fast as possible. These minis have way too much detail in my opinion, and all the Widet minis in general, and I'm painting these for a client, so I need to break down the parts in order to be more efficient. So make a plan every time you start batch painting or speed painting, because if you need to spend 50 minutes figuring out which color to use next and then realizing that your scheme is bad is something that's not really worth the hassle. So I'm covering the larger surface sections first and work on the smaller details like the weapons and pouches later, and I already have a color scheme in plan. Next, I cover every armor, leather strap, boots, wrist guards, bells with cavalry brown. This brown is pretty much complementary to the Sunz of Aorus Green, so it's going to create a harmonic look together. I'm using a little bit thicker consistency this time, and I start to be more precise around the details. As you can see on the footage, there are lots of white spots missing on the ropes, so I'm going back to fix those between the step as soon as I discover them. Angle the mini and not your brush in a way that you can reach the more problematic areas without staining the ropes. So don't do it like this. We always adjust the mini with the hand we are holding it and not twisting our brush holding hand so we can be more precise and comfortable. Make a checkup round after this one to see if every part of the mini has paint on it except the helmets and the fur bindings, and proceed to the next step. You will see that I could improve my checkup routine a lot, but I haven't batch painted in a good way, so you know, it's always harder to check up different scopes. That's why I highly recommend you to do the same variant of these walkers, or I will slap on your tiny hand. Now some of the walkers have this fur binding on their robes and feathers or hair on their helmet, so I cover those with Baneblade brown. This is a greyish brown, I think works very well here with cavalry brown and Sunz of Aorus Green scheme, because it doesn't add anything crazy in hue to the palette, but stands out just enough so you don't mistake it for the current skin color, for example. On these I use a base layer consistency to cover them quickly. After that I like to integrate my shadow areas over the mini, and for that I will use Xereus purple. This is a very nice and saturated purple that will give so much depth to our shadow tones, like Granny's varicose veins to her leg. If you want, you can use any wash of your choice, but believe Papa Labors that purple is the way to go here. If you are a returning viewer, then you know that purple is almost always the answer, but it's almost always the right answer as well. I mix some contrast medium to the paint, but if you don't have that, just use water, the result will be pretty similar. Once you have a wash-like consistency, add a couple of brush strokes to your shadow areas and the recess areas in general. Don't be afraid to drench the mini in purple, just make sure you remove most of the paint by rinsing off your brush, wiping it off on a paper towel, and keep soaking up the paint until you can see it over the recess areas and where you like to have more shadow. If you let huge pools of purple dry on the highlight areas, you will create some horrible texture, and I'm going to slap on your tiny hand so hard you are going to cry for like a day. So let's avoid that, like Granny avoids a healthy diet, and only focus on the crevices on the minis. After you check the wash is completely dry, you can check by smelling it. Or even better, try touching it. Then it's time for the highlight process. Let's start with the skin and move a brownish purple skin tone to a more desaturated green with Straken green. Use thin layers to build up the opacity over the highlight areas. On the face, focus on the chin, cheeks and nose area, but keep the dark recess shadows that the contrast paint created previously. On the hands, cover the areas that face up, but keep the shadow areas between the fingers for more definition. When you're using layering like this, always end your brush strokes on the parts where you like to build up the highlights, so the transitions will be smooth as Granny's butt cheek. or don't, and I will give you the Eastern European eye contact. Don't need to spend too much time on this. It's more about using the right consistency of the paint than anything else to be efficient. Once you are done with the first round of highlights, it's time to do the eyes and teeth. Use base layer consistency with your chosen off-white and load up your brush like you would load up Granny's tea with sedatives for her nap time, and remove the excess on your hand with a rolling and pulling motion. Once your brush is pointy like Granny's nipples, then tackle the eyes from the sides, only from the sides and always from the sides, since this way the shape of the brush can follow the shape of the eyes more or less. If you are wondering how to get better at painting eyes, this way, when you have to paint like 250 of these guys. The eyes on these are nicely sculpted, so you can only blame your skills if you can't succeed, but if you can't succeed for the first time, try succeeding on the 6th time. Wait, no. If your eyesight is bad, then use a magnifying lamp or glasses to help you out. Once you are done with the eyes, pick out the teeth one by one to give these boys a nice set of shinies. For that approach, align the mini in a more vertical way and make your brush parallel to each tooth that you paint. This way, you'll have an easier time. Let's push the contrast a tiny bit more with necrotic flesh on the skin, reducing the highlight areas on the cheekbones, nose and chin. On the hands, pick out the knuckles with the same thin layer consistency like we used with the stricken green for a smoother finish, and cover less and less of the previous highlight areas so you don't lose contrast. This value will make our zombie have a nice and desaturated pale green look. Now you can relax, guys, because it's time for dry brushing, right? Everyone loves dry brushing. It's gonna be easier than removing socks from Granny's feet in the summer. I grabbed some red skin flesh and a small dry brush. I dip the dry brush into very little water, wipe it off on a paper towel, and then go for the paint and remove most of that paint on a paper towel as well. I just give it a touch of water so that the paint is less likely dry between the bristles, and I can increase the longevity of my dry brush, because I'm cheap. Highlight all the cavalry brown parts on each mini. Keep in mind that armor panels on the minis will receive some metallic paint, so don't spend too much time on those. But only those metal sheets will be painted with metallic paints, but the leather armor that holds the sheet are not. So catch those edges with your dry brush. Same goes for all the pouches, belts, leather shoulders, wrist guards, and most importantly on the boots. All those surfaces I'm treating as leather and will have the same color. As far as I can tell, these zombies are part of the same army, and armies has uniforms, so it's more likely they use more or less the same materials. And again, guys, you need to paint like 623 of these, so once you painted all of them and feel like you need to spice up the pouches to be a different brown than the boots, please be my guest, but believe me, I have a very good assumption that you are not going to care about at that point. Apply very little pressure to your dry brush when applying these highlights. You don't need to force it, it's not like diarrhea, so you can skip school, right? Gentle strokes, like when you're combing Granny's hair. Now we cover all the metallic parts of our zombie soldiers. Always use a different brush and water pot when painting metallic, so ask for another mug from Granny and use a brush that has a decent tip, but you don't care for it as much because metallic paints will ruin your brush's tip faster than before you can say
megszentségteleníthetetlenségeskedéseitekért.
This is a pretty straightforward process. Use a base layer consistency, and you can do this with even one layer if you are lucky. Cover all the helmets, armor panels, belt buckles, metallic parts on the scabbards, rivets and the buttons. except on the variants that has leather shoulders and gold wrist guards. Those will come up in the next step. Try to be precise on the helmets. Papa Labor's not gonna lie, I made some mistakes here and there, but fix those later. Just try to find the tip on those rivets on the helmets and gently apply the paint over them to roughly have the same volume on them. Okay? In most cases, speed painting is not about how creamy your blends are, but how clean these areas can be with picking out the details like these. A clean model always looks nicer on the table than a messy one, so if you're having trouble with the highlights, just try to focus on nice and even coverage on the minis and clear separation between the different details. On the gold binding on the helmet and on the wrist guards, I use some brass scorpion. On the helmet binding, try to use the side of your brush's tip so you'll less likely mess up the face. On the wrist guards, it's a pretty straightforward process again, just use base layer consistency and you'll be fine as Granny in her 20s. Oil. I put mine in one of those anti-spillage holders, and I'm proud to say that this container is not half empty because I used that much of it, but I spilled it like the best of us. Now, give a nice wash for all the metallic parts. You can be generous with it, but only up to a point where the surface tension holds the wash to the metallic areas. It doesn't really matter if this wash dries to a splotchy finish, because this armor belongs to zombies. It should look a little bit dirty, and that's completely fine. After that, I cover the bases with black. Now, if you want to have a very quick and tabletop ready paint job, then this is it. You can stop here and enjoy playing with your minis. This took me a little bit less than 20 minutes per piece, which I would say is pretty fast. If you want to see a quick basing video that will fit all these minis and could be used for your Massive Darkness 2 minis as well, because the color scheme is very similar to my Massive Darkness 2 base painting video, check that video on my Patreon page. I know you guys probably bought the crossover packs for Massive Darkness, because setting up a Massive Darkness 2 quest usually takes like an hour, and who wouldn't want to increase that duration with mixing another game in? So Papa Labor's got you covered, if you gave me money, of course. Now, for the brave who stayed, we will push the contrast on with some Cyberite green to make these boys stand out more on the table. Every area that faces towards the sky should be highlighted. Don't be afraid to add a little bit more volume to your highlights and use thin layers to build up the opacity. Now, look how the purple shadows appear a little bit darker once we apply these highlights, yet it has a nice hue to the shadows. It's quite lovely in it. The secret ingredient is the right consistency again. Then I use Star Larsen to edge highlight the leather armor panels, highlight the boots, and cover those little strings that hold the armor panels on the leather parts. After that, I push the contrast a little bit more on the ropes with Ghostbuster Green, reducing the highlights inside my previous highlight layer. 1 or 2 layers of this highlight can be very sufficient just to build up the highlights towards the upper half of the larger folds, and focus a little bit more on the upper half of the torso where this fabric is visible. On the fur bindings, I use some Baneblade brown mixed with ice yellow to bring out the texture a little bit more, using a consistency that is between a base and a thin layer, picking out chunks of the fur following their shape. I do the same on the feathers or hair on the helmets, as well to bring the focal point more towards the head. Alright guys, why that really went strong with this green glowy vibe. So we add the touch of green to the eyes of the zombies. Grab some fluorescent green and glaze over some of the eyeballs of the zombies and end your brush strokes around the eye sockets. This way you can create a faint green glow to the eyes, and since we use the very desaturated colors for the skin, this will pop out even more. So we finish up the zombies like a good Marvel movie, which can be done with that glowing eyes and a new haircut, right? Unfortunately, we can't give a haircut to these guys, but you know, we got the glowy eyes at least. Give it around 78 layers to create the desired effect. If you overdid it a little bit and the white part of the eyes become more green than you prefer, mix some ice yellow to the fluo green and repaint the center of the eyeballs, so you will have more depth to them. One of the guys has his shield. I edge highlighted the wood panels of his shield with the side of my brush's tip using a thin layer consistency to add a bit more detail to it. Lastly, I covered the goatees of the soldiers that have them. I chose this very dark grey because I'm guessing these are Asian zombies. So since the whole game got this Asian vibe, and most of the Asian people have black hair, right? To highlight the goatees, I add a bit more ice yellow to the mix and focus on their top half. I sprinkle some blood effect over the zombies and their bases, using a brush and the airbrush to create a splatter pattern. First, I start with a brush that has some very stiff bristles and bend on the bristles and just let them go so the spring effect will splatter the paint. Always try this first just on a paper towel before applying it on the zombies to see if you like it or not. If you don't have any technical paint for this, just use some red you have, but if you happen to have a gloss medium, just mix it with your red and it's basically the same thing. Now my other method is to use the airbrush with a low air pressure and blow on a regular brush that was loaded up with the paint. If you don't have an airbrush, you can blow on your brush with a straw, and when you do that, please send me a picture of your process. Then I will send back that picture with a note, add some blood to the cloths and hands as these zombies just stirred up someone. I wouldn't apply it over the face because it's going to cover up the details rather than adding more to them, but try it out for yourself, experiment, and when you failed, think about how wise of you would be to listen more to Papa Labor's. Lastly, I add some details with the brush again, but I like to have some more of the effect. With that, the zombie walkers are done and ready for the table. If you are new here, I cover games on my channel and mostly on my Patreon page, where you can find PDF painting guides for the Necromancer, and the heroes will be covered in PDFs as well. So if you don't want to miss out those, please consider joining my Patreon page like these lovely people. You can find tons of Massive Darkness 2 and Marvel Zombies guides if Simon games are your jam, or Asmodee games, or I don't know. We are still waiting on the Massive Darkness and Marvel Zombies new owners. You know, insert the name who's going to buy Marvel Zombies probably. And make sure to subscribe to Papa Labor so you don't miss the upcoming video for White Death. A special shout out goes to Cold-Blooded Dom, Trying to Paint Minis, Jonathan Mosner, Glitchy McCrash, Penoman45, Michael Kerr, Remlo, Simon Stefan and Courtney Hester. I hope your day will be as smooth as a granny's butt cheek.